Pick up a head of garlic at the grocery store. Turn it over in your hand. Look at the bottom, that flat dry circle where all the cloves meet at the base. Most people never give it a second thought. They peel a clove, throw it in a pan, and move on. But that small flat circle is the most important thing about growing garlic in water. And if you do not understand what it does and which direction it faces, nothing else you try will work the way you want it to. Garlic grown in a water bottle, done right, pushes roots down in 7 to 10 days. The shoots go green and tall. You harvest fresh garlic greens for months from something that cost you almost nothing. A plastic bottle you were going to throw away and a head of garlic from the kitchen. That is the whole material cost. $2, maybe $3. And the harvest, if you set it up correctly, keeps coming long after a garden bed would have gone dormant for the season. Now I have to be honest with you. There is a part of this that should make you think. Garlic greens, fresh, sharp, alive, sold in small bundles at specialty stores or farmers' markets can run $4 or $5 for a handful. The stores do not advertise that you can grow the same thing on a windowsill for almost nothing, indefinitely, with no soil and no garden space. There is no money in telling you that. There never is, as far as I have seen. I will come back to that thought. Stay with me. My name is Hiroshi Tanaka. 40-some years I kept a kitchen garden on a mountain slope in Japan, what we call satoyama country, the land between the forest and the cultivated valley, where people grew what they needed and wasted almost nothing. Garlic grew in the ground there, yes, but garlic greens grew wherever there was a container and a little water close to the kitchen door. My father kept them near the doma, the earthen floor entry of our house, in cracked ceramic jars that were no longer useful for anything else. Nothing went to waste. Everything had a second purpose. I put together a written guide called Washitsu. It covers the same village logic applied to growing food and managing a home with simple, cheap materials. If you want to go deeper on food, you can grow indoors without soil, without a plot of land, and without spending money on supplies. The link is in the description. That kind of knowledge is worth keeping alive. That is why I keep putting it out. If what I share is useful to you, press the subscribe button. There is more where this comes from. And tell me in the comments, have you ever tried growing anything in water before, garlic or otherwise, and did it work or did it rot on you? I read every single comment. Now, the flat base of the garlic clove. Let me start with why it matters so much, because this is the piece that most tutorials skip. And it is the reason so many people set up a perfectly good bottle and end up with nothing but a softening clove and cloudy water after 2 weeks. The flat end of a garlic clove is called the basal plate. That is the botanical term. You do not need the term. What you need to understand is this. The basal plate is where the roots come from. It is the only place they come from. If that surface is not positioned correctly relative to the water, the roots have nowhere productive to go, and the clove sits there doing nothing useful until it starts to deteriorate. What most people do, and I have watched it happen many times since I started sharing these methods, is place the clove tip down into the bottle or the glass. It looks logical. The tip is pointed like a seed going into soil. The instinct is to point it downward, but that is wrong. The tip is the shoot end. It must face down toward the water. The roots do not need to sit in the water. That is the other half of this. They need to reach toward it. The basal plate should hover just at the surface, close enough that the roots, as they emerge over the first several days, can find the moisture and pull what they need. If the flat base is submerged, the clove suffocates, the tissue softens, the roots rot before they anchor, and you get that cloudy, foul-smelling water that people associate with failed garlic growing. It is not that garlic does not grow in water. It grows very well in water. The failure almost always comes down to 2 things: which end faces down and how deep the water sits. One is orientation. One is depth. Both are easy to get right once you understand what the clove is actually trying to do. My grandfather used to say that a plant, like a person, knows which way it wants to go. You do not teach it direction, you give it the right conditions and then you stop interfering. With garlic in a bottle, that means respecting the basil plate and giving it just enough water to reach, not so much that it drowns before the roots have a chance to form. The bottle itself, its shape, how you prepare it, what you do to the water before you even place the clove, matters more than people expect. A water bottle is not just a container. Prepared the wrong way, it works against the garlic. Prepared the right way, it creates almost exactly the right environment for fast, healthy root development. Start with the clove itself, because the bottle and the water mean nothing if you begin with the wrong piece of garlic. Walk into any grocery store and you will find two broad types of garlic. Soft-neck garlic, the kind with a pliable stem that braids easily. The kind sold most commonly in supermarkets across the country is what you want for water growing. It adapts well, it roots reliably, and it is available year-round without a trip to a specialty store. Hard-neck garlic, which has a rigid central stalk and is usually found at farmers' markets or garden centers in the fall, is better suited for soil. It can be coaxed into water, but it is slower to root and less forgiving of imperfect conditions. If you're starting out, reach for soft-neck. Within that, the size of the clove matters. Choose the largest, firmest cloves from the outer layer of the bulb. The outer cloves are always bigger than the inner ones. And size here is not vanity. A larger clove carries more stored energy, which means the plant can push roots and shoots without depending entirely on the water for its first burst of growth. Think of it like a battery. A bigger battery runs longer before it needs outside input. Feel the clove before you commit to it. The skin should be papery and tight, not peeling away from the flesh underneath. Press it gently between your fingers. It should feel solid and dense, not soft, not spongy, not hollow at the tip. Any clove that gives a little under pressure is already past its best. It will still try to grow, but it will take longer, root weakly, and be far more likely to soften and cloud the water before it establishes. One more thing about the clove: do not peel it. Leave the papery outer skin on. That skin is not just packaging. It is a layer of protection for the tissue underneath while the roots are forming. Strip it away and you expose the clove to the water prematurely, which increases the risk of deterioration before the roots are strong enough to sustain the plant. The skin comes away naturally as growth progresses. Leave it alone. Now, the bottle. A standard plastic water bottle, the kind that holds 16 or 20 ounces, works well. Clear plastic is what most people reach for, and it works. But here is something worth knowing. Roots prefer darkness. In the wild, roots grow underground, away from light. In a clear bottle, light penetrates the water and encourages algae growth, which competes with the roots and clouds the water faster than it otherwise would. A dark bottle, brown, green, or one you wrap with a strip of paper or cloth around the lower half, slows that algae growth considerably and keeps the root environment cleaner for longer. If you only have clear bottles, do not stop there. Take a strip of newspaper, a piece of brown paper bag, or a strip of cloth and wrap it around the bottom 2/3 of the bottle. Tape or tie it in place. The top stays open, the clove sits above the wrap, and the roots grow down into darkness. That single change makes a visible difference in how fast and how cleanly the roots develop.
The cut matters too, and it is very important for the setup. You are not using the whole bottle upright with the cap on, which is a common mistake. Cut the bottle roughly in half. The top half, inverted, sits inside the bottom half like a funnel. The clove rests in the bottle's neck, which holds it at just the right height above the water collected in the bottom. The neck is narrow enough to cradle most garlic cloves without letting them fall through, and it naturally keeps the basil plate close to the water surface without submerging it. Some cloves are small enough to slip through the neck. If that happens, do not wedge a toothpick through the clove. That breaks the tissue and opens the flesh to contamination. Instead, cut a small cross in a piece of cardboard, slide the clove through the center so the base points down, and lay the cardboard across the rim of the bottom half of the bottle. It sounds improvised because it is. That is the point of this simple setup. Water level is where a great many people lose the plot after getting the setup right. The water should sit no higher than about 1/4 of an inch below the basal plate when you first place the clove. Close, not touching. As the roots emerge over the following days, and they will if the clove is good and the orientation is correct, they will reach down into the water on their own. You do not need to raise the water to meet them. Let the roots find it. That reaching is part of what makes them grow fast and strong. A root that has to work a little develops better than one that is handed everything from the start. Refresh the water every 2 to 3 days. Do not wait for it to cloud. Do not wait for a smell. Fresh water every 2 to 3 days, poured out and replaced completely. The garlic takes up water and releases small amounts of organic material as the roots grow, and that material accumulates. Stale water grows bacteria, which can harm the plant. Bacteria soften roots and slow down growth significantly. Soft roots mean slow growth and eventually a failed clove. 2 to 3 days is the right interval for water changes. That is the discipline you need to maintain for success. The temperature of the replacement water matters more than people expect. Cold water straight from the tap shocks the root system, especially in the early days when the roots are just establishing. Let the water sit in a glass or jar on the counter for an hour before you pour it in, or use water that has been sitting at room temperature. Keep the water at room temperature. Not warm, not cold, but just right for the roots. The roots respond to consistency. The same way a mountain stream stays cold and clear rather than swinging between extremes, the water in the bottle should feel stable to the plant. Light is the last condition to get right, and the timing of it is something almost nobody mentions. For the first 10 to 14 days, while the roots are developing, the clove wants indirect light. Not darkness, not full sun, and indirect. A spot away from a south-facing window or on a counter a few feet back from the light source. Direct sun during root development drives the shoot upward too fast. You get a tall, pale, weak shoot that collapses before it produces much worth harvesting. After the roots are established, and you will see them clearly through the bottom of the bottle reaching down 2 or 3 inches into the water, move the bottle into brighter light. A south or east-facing windowsill, a spot that gets 4 to 6 hours of direct or strong indirect sun. The established root system can now support vigorous shoot growth, and the light drives that growth the right way, dense, green, flavorful. Doing it the other way around, full sun from the start, then pulling back, does not produce the same result. The sequence matters for a healthy garlic plant and better harvest. Roots first in calm indirect light. Shoots after in stronger light. My father grew things the same way he approached most work. You prepare the foundation before you ask anything of the structure above it. There is something I add to the water that I have never seen mentioned in any modern guide on growing garlic indoors. It costs almost nothing for such a big result in the end. It takes 3 seconds to do. And it is the reason the water in my bottles stays clean and clear for the full 2 to 3 days between changes, rather than turning murky after the first day. A small pinch of activated charcoal in the water. Not charcoal from a barbecue grill that is treated with chemicals and has no place near food. Activated charcoal sold in small bags at aquarium supply stores or health food stores for around $3 or $4 a bag that will last you many months of garlic growing. In Japan, we use binchotan, a dense white charcoal made from oak prized for centuries for purifying water and absorbing odors. The principle is the same. Charcoal is porous at a microscopic level, full of tiny channels that trap organic particles, bacteria, and the compounds that cause water to cloud and smell. Drop 3 or 4 small pieces into the bottom of the bottle before you add your water. They sit there doing quiet work every single day. My grandfather kept a stick of binchotan in the ceramic water jar by the irori, the sunken hearth at the center of our home. The water stayed fresh longer than it had any right to in a warm kitchen. He did not explain the chemistry of it. He just said that clean water and clean tools were the foundation of everything else, and that a person who let either go to rot deserved the trouble that followed. He was not a gentle teacher, but he was a correct one. If you cannot find activated charcoal or do not want to wait for an order to arrive, there is a second option that works almost as well. Add 1 teaspoon of plain rice vinegar to the water each time you refresh it. Not white wine vinegar, not apple cider vinegar, not balsamic, plain rice vinegar, the kind that costs $2 at any grocery store. Rice vinegar is mildly acidic, and that acidity suppresses the bacterial and algae growth that clouds water without harming the roots at all. Garlic is not sensitive to mild acidity. The roots do not notice. The bacteria do notice the acidity, however, and stop growing. You do not need both the charcoal and the vinegar. Choose one of these 2 effective methods for your garden. The charcoal is my preference because it is set and forget. The pieces stay in the bottle through every water change and keep working. The vinegar needs to be added fresh each time. Both work perfectly to keep the water clear and healthy. Pick the one that fits how you work. Now let's talk about harvesting the garlic you've grown. This is the part that most written guides either rush past or get wrong, and it is where the promise of a large harvest either pays off or disappoints. Garlic grown in a water bottle gives you 2 distinct harvests, and understanding that you have 2 options, not one, is what makes the difference between a modest result and a yield that genuinely surprises you. The first harvest is the garlic greens. The shoots emerge from the tip of the clove quite fast. They emerge from the tip of the clove within the first week to 10 days and grow quickly once the root system is established and the bottle moves into stronger light. When the shoots reach 6 to 8 inches tall, which happens faster than you expect, sometimes within 3 weeks of setup, you can cut them. Not all the way to the base. Cut to about 1 inch above the clove, leaving a short stub. The clove will regrow quickly after the first cut. It will send up a second shoot, sometimes a third. Each cut is a harvest. A single well-chosen clove in a properly prepared bottle can give you 3 or 4 cuts of fresh garlic greens over 6 to 8 weeks. That is the system for continuous yield throughout the weeks. That is what people mean when they say the harvest is large. Not one cutting, but a repeated yield from the same clove. Use those greens the way you would use green onions or chives. Raw in salads, chopped over eggs, stirred into soups at the last moment. The flavor is sharp and fresh, more alive than dried garlic, more delicate than a raw clove. My mother kept a row of these jars near the kitchen window through the winter months when the garden gave nothing. She added the greens to miso soup almost every morning for flavor. A small thing can make a big difference in your kitchen. It made a difference in our daily meals and family health. The second harvest is the bulb itself, and this is important. Water alone cannot produce a full garlic bulb. It cannot. It cannot produce a bulb without the proper nutrients. The clove will root, it will shoot, it will give you those repeated cuttings of greens, but to develop into a mature bulb with distinct daughter cloves worth replanting or eating as whole garlic, it needs soil. The nutrients in soil, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and the complex microbial life that makes those nutrients available to plant roots are not present in plain water, and no amount of water changes or clever additions fully replaces them.
I will be plain about this because I think it matters. If you set this up expecting to pull a full head of garlic out of a water bottle after a few weeks, you will be disappointed. What the water bottle does exceptionally well is root development and green production. It does those two things faster and more reliably than most people expect. What it does not do is replace a garden bed for bulb production. If you want the bulb, here is what you do. After 3 or 4 weeks in water, once the root system is 2 to 3 inches long and clearly vigorous, transfer the clove into a pot of good garden soil or potting mix. Plant it with the basil plate about 2 inches down, the same orientation it has been in the bottle. Roots down, shoot up. The roots transplant easily because they have already done the hard work of establishing in water. The plant picks up where it left off, but now it has access to the nutrients it needs to develop a full bulb. You get the speed benefit of water rooting combined with the yield of soil growing. That combination is what the old people in my village understood without ever needing to name it. You use each environment for what it does best, and then you move on. For the bulb harvest, you are looking at an additional 3 to 4 months in soil after transplanting. But the head start from water rooting often shaves several weeks off the total growing time compared to direct soil planting. The roots go in strong and ready. The plant does not spend its early weeks in soil trying to establish. It is already established. Watch for the lower leaves to yellow and dry, starting from the bottom of the plant upward. When roughly half the leaves have dried, usually 5 or 6 of them, the bulb is ready. Gently pull the garlic bulb from the soil. Cure it in a dry, ventilated spot out of direct sun for 2 to 3 weeks before storing or eating. A mesh bag hung in a garage or a shed works well. Do not skip the curing. An uncured bulb goes soft and loses flavor quickly. You only need 6 bottles to start this rolling system. That is the number I recommend when people ask me how to turn this from a single experiment into something that actually feeds a household through the winter months. Set up 6 bottles on a windowsill, staggered by 1 week each. Start the first bottle today to begin the cycle. Start the second bottle 7 days from now. The third, 7 days after that. Continue until all 6 bottles are running. What you end up with is a rolling system. Every week, 1 bottle reaches the cutting stage while the others are at different points in their cycle. You are never waiting for your garlic to grow. You are never without fresh garlic greens for your cooking. The harvest is continuous rather than arriving all at once and then leaving a gap. 6 bottles, 6 cloves, a total setup cost of perhaps $4 or $5 if you count the garlic and the charcoal together. The bottles themselves cost nothing because you already have them. The windowsill space required is about 18 inches wide. A cutting board's worth of windowsill space is all you need. That is the whole footprint of a system that produces fresh garlic greens on a weekly basis, from late fall straight through to early spring, when an outdoor garden cannot give you anything at all. If you want to run the dual harvest version, greens from the water stage, then bulbs from soil, set up 3 bottles for continuous green cutting and transplant the other 3 into soil pots after their roots establish. Stagger those transplants the same way. Pots do not need to be large. A 6-inch pot holds 1 clove comfortably with room for the root system to spread. Line 3 or 4 pots on a deep windowsill or under a grow light, and you have both harvests running in parallel, indoors, year-round. The cost of a small grow light, a simple clip-on LED panel from any hardware or garden center, runs about $20 to $25 and lasts for years. It draws very little electricity to keep it running through the winter. If your apartment or home does not get reliable southern exposure, that $20 light replaces the sun well enough for garlic, which is not a particularly demanding plant once it is rooted and established. My father worked with what the mountain gave him. The angle of the slope, the direction the trees broke, the way a stone wall held warmth in the afternoon. You work with what your space gives you, and you fill the gaps with the simplest tool available. Now I want to take a moment, because this is the part that matters beyond the garlic itself. Fresh garlic greens at a farmer's market. The bundles with the long green shoots still attached, the kind that smell like the best version of what garlic can be, sell for $4 to $6 for a small handful. Specialty grocery stores charge more. Those same greens take 3 weeks to produce at home, from a clove that costs less than 25 cents in a bottle that was heading for the recycling bin. The math is not complicated when you look at it this way. What is worth asking is why nobody lays it out plainly. The answer is the same answer that applies to most things sold at a premium in small quantities. There is no money in telling you that a windowsill and $2 of garlic replaces a weekly purchase indefinitely. The store needs you to keep buying. The magazine needs a product to recommend. The gardening supply company needs you to believe that growing food requires a kit, a bag of specialized medium, a set of nutrients in plastic bottles with labels full of words designed to sound essential. None of it is necessary for garlic. None of it is needed at all. In my village, the knowledge of what you could grow without buying anything from anyone was simply part of being a competent adult. My grandfather kept that knowledge the way he kept his tools, in good order, ready to use, passed to the next person who needed it. He would have found it strange, I think, that growing food from a kitchen scrap in a jar of water had become something people paid to be taught. He would not have been angry about it. He would have been quiet in the way he was quiet when something confirmed what he already knew about the direction things were going. That knowledge belongs to you, not to a store, not to a subscription box, not to an algorithm that sells you seeds in a branded packet for $8 when the same variety sits in a bin at the grocery store for $2. You already have everything what you need right at home. You have had it the whole time. So here is what I want you to do this week. Go to the grocery store and pick up 1 head of soft-neck garlic, the standard kind, firm and tight-skinned, $1 or $2 at most. Separate the largest outer cloves from the head. Set aside the 3 or 4 biggest cloves you find. Find a plastic bottle, cut it in half. Wrap the lower half with a strip of paper or cloth to block the light. Fill the bottom with room-temperature water to just under 1/4 of an inch below where the basil plate will sit. Drop 2 or 3 small pieces of activated charcoal into the water, or have a small bottle of plain rice vinegar ready for your first water change. Place the clove basil plate down in the neck of the inverted top half. Set it in indirect light. Leave it alone for 10 to 14 days while the roots establish. Refresh the water every 2 to 3 days, then move it into a bright window. Now watch what happens as the first green sprout emerges. When the shoot reaches 6 to 8 inches, cut it 1 inch above the clove. Then use it fresh to flavor your cooking. Wait for the next sprout, then the next one after that. Then you wait for the next one after that. The system builds itself once you start. Then you set up a third bottle. The system builds itself once you start. If you want the full bulb, let the roots run for 3 to 4 weeks, then transplant into a 6-inch pot of good potting soil, 2 inches deep, same orientation. Be sure to mark the date clearly on a stake. In 3 to 4 months, when the lower leaves start yellowing, you will know. Press the subscribe button if you have not already. There is more of this kind of thing coming, and what comes next connects directly to what you have learned here. Tell me in the comments, how much windowsill space do you have to work with, and are you going for the greens, the bulb, or both? I want to know what setup people are actually working with. I read every single comment you leave for me. The natural next step from here is soil. What to add to it, what not to add. And the one thing my grandfather put in every garden bed that modern gardeners stopped doing 50 years ago and are only now starting to bring back. That is the next one. Tend what you plant, use what you grow, and waste as little as possible in between. The people who figured out how to feed themselves from small spaces and simple containers did not do it because they were clever. They did it because they had to, and because the habit, once started, never really made sense to stop. Take care and happy growing.